Trials in the field under fire, and mentors. Up to this point, I haven't mentioned much about mentors, friends, or supervisors who helped me through the years with the police department. As a rookie, of course, I had my training officer, Chris Benefiel, who was a little rogue and went on to a rather undistinguished career as a narcotics detective and street officer. He died in 2019. As a supervisor, either sergeant or later second lieutenant, I had several assistant supervisors who were instrumental in showing me how and how not to supervise. Jim Word, John Gorell, and Lee Jeffries were all, at some point, my number two men, and each had their accomplishments as well as their flaws that I could build on, help change, or learn from. As for mentors, one person who was particularly instrumental in helping me get ahead was J.J. Whalen. I really don't recall how we met. It may have been during an in-service class or something. In any event, my first real memory was when he was a homicide or major crime supervisor and I was a sergeant at the McLean station. He'd often contact me by radio to meet somewhere, usually on a Sunday, if I recall, a usually quiet day, particularly for a CIB supervisor. And again, if I recall, he was usually going from station to station to pick up cases that were being forwarded from station officers and detectives to CIB for follow-up. Now that I think about it, perhaps our first meeting was because there had been a lot of controversy over a promotional process that involved supervisors' evaluations. He had a real difficult time with his major, who wanted him to change some scores, and he refused. It may have been that he wanted to meet to see how I had rated my subordinates. JJ's first wife had been killed in a bank robbery in Chantilly before I ever joined the department. He had spent a few years as a motorcycle cop in the traffic division before he was promoted to supervisor. We stayed in touch over the years, but his biggest contribution to my career development was when I was assigned to the CAD project. Being off the street and disconnected from what the expectations for future supervisors were, I scored very poorly in 2 promotional processes for first lieutenant. While I didn't feel particularly bad about the process or my performance, I always had a lurking suspicion that the upper echelon had directed that I not be rated highly because they needed me to finish the CAD project and couldn't afford to waste my position and me on a first lieutenant slot. In any event, another promotional process was approaching, and JJ came to my office, as so often he did, to meet for lunch or brunch, and after eating, we'd drive around to various sections of Annandale, where he'd drill me on aspects of hostage barricade situations, traffic incidents, and other types of scenarios which might be part of the upcoming process. If I recall, this process involved 3 components: an inbox exercise, reading, sorting, prioritizing, and responding to a set of problems in your imaginary inbox while your superior officer had been hypothetically incapacitated. The second component was a tactical scenario that you had an hour to evaluate, develop a plan, and present before a board of 4 officials, usually 2 from inside the department and 2 from outside the department. The third component may have been a structured interview or series of what would you do type of questions. Had it not been for JJ's tutoring, I would not have come in, I believe, 3rd in the final ranking. He got me to think about the position I was competing for, putting myself in that position, often thinking of the next rank up, since your superior is usually incapacitated in the scenario and in real life, and taking a position of authority using strong action verbs to describe your actions. For instance, no, I think, I'd consider, etc. After my years inside working on the CAD project, he shook me back to practicality and had me thinking like a commander, not just a supervisor. To finish this portion of the leadership training portion of this story, when I learned that I had scored so highly on the exam, I knew I was destined for a new assignment after 6 years overseeing the CAD Communications Center implementation and shakedown. My civilian supervisor, Mike Fischel, who remains a close friend today, called me into his office and said, "Well, I have some good news and some not so good news. You scored number 3 on the lieutenant's process, and you're probably going to continue to be assigned here for another year." Well, I hadn't worked that hard to get promoted to spend another year inside, missing out on an assistant command position, losing another year of field experience so others could outpace me in future promotional exams. "Bullshit," I screamed at Michael. "I've put 6 years in this place and I'm getting out. I'm going to see the chief right now." I stormed out of his office and drove straight to the chief's office. I walked in and told Jackie Huffman, his secretary, that I didn't have an appointment, but that I really need to see Chief Granfield now. I may have imagined this, or just suspected it, or just filled in the blanks later in life, but I think Jackie said, "Oh, he's expecting you." Mike obviously had called ahead and given him a heads up. The chief congratulated me on doing well in the first lieutenant's process, and I explained my disappointment over Mike's pronouncement that I was going to continue to be in communications for another year. I told him how I had set things in place for my responsibilities to be assumed by a civilian supervisor, that Mike was uncomfortable with change, for example, losing me, and that I believed staying there any longer would jeopardize my career development. He said, "How long do you need to transition out?" It was early to mid-May at the time. Rather than be cocky or overly anxious, I said, "How about July 1st? "July 1st it is," Chief Granfield replied. This is one of those times I just had to be assertive in my own best interests. There was no chain of command that I wanted to go through. I had sat in enough meetings and briefings with John Granfield to know that his door would be open in a case like this. In some other agency, at some other time, I'm certain the secretary would have said, "He's not in, or you'll have to make an appointment." But the chief could have ditched me or held my assertiveness against me. But in all honesty, I think he knew that Mike was keeping me around for his own comfort and that I needed to get out. I always respected John Granfield for handling this way. "After you leave my office, I'll call Mike and tell him what we've arranged." Note, not my decision. And it wouldn't be long before I was returning the favor, keeping him out of a nasty political fight between 2 candidates for county board chairman.